We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
2024 is closer than you think, and so far, the only major contender to officially announce is former President Donald Trump. Current President Joe Biden is still reluctant to proclaim his intent, and the dark horse of the race, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, recently gave an interview that was full of, as Paul Simon might say, hints and allegations. Now, we're back with the top team triumvirate, and I want to know how they measure the rising tide in American politics. Now, Tim, I think we're all agreed that Governor Ron DeSantis is throwing his hat in the ring for the GOP nomination. How do you rate him as a candidate, specifically his chances against Donald Trump?
Well, to the matter of whether he's actually running or not, the fact that he said in his interview with Piers Morgan that, I'm going to read it exactly, I have what it takes to be president and I can beat Biden. Okay, so that takes care of any doubts about whether he's going to run or not.
He's an undeclared candidate at this point.
Now, Donald Trump has unleashed all manner of personal and political attacks. I mean, he's unleashing everything that he has in his arsenal on Ron DeSantis, talking about the different statistics that he can use to show that Florida isn't quite as great as you think, right? The problem is, by pointing to certain education statistics, crime statistics, et cetera, that's all overridden by the fact that Ron DeSantis won a landslide victory. In other words, the people of Florida have delivered their verdict on Ron DeSantis, and it has propelled him to a place where you refer to him as a dark horse, Mark, but I think in the minds of many people, including many conservatives who are looking for an alternative, a less combustible alternative than Donald Trump while supporting the same policies. You know, Ron DeSantis is considered a favorite. In fact, he does just as well, if not slightly better than Trump against Biden. And then there's the matter of these polls. Okay, and I'm going to do a more thorough piece on this for LibertyNation.com, but, you know, Trump is trying to promote all these polls showing that he is ahead of DeSantis in these national polls, and he is by anywhere from, I'm going to say 10 to 20 points. He has a decisive lead in most of these national polls, but that belies the fact that in state polls, state by state, in battleground states, DeSantis is leading. Now, that seems to be self-contradictory. How can that be? Well, early in the game like this, and it's still early for 2024, name recognition becomes critical. No one has better name recognition than Donald Trump. Ron DeSantis may be well known to those of us who are political junkies, but he's not terribly well known to the average American. So that whole thing is yet to play out. But I can tell you that the state polls in critical battleground states like Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Florida paint a very different picture of the race than the national polls do.
Do you think that's a lot of independents coming out? People who don't like let's call it the wokery of the left, or the bombasticness perhaps of the Donald Trump presidency, but enjoyed the policies and the policies that took place during the presidency.
Yes, indeed. And 40% of the country declares itself as being independent. So who has a greater appeal to independence, Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis? Well, in 2020, Donald Trump essentially lost the election because of independents who just had enough of his approach, shall we say, and his attitude and that kind of thing. So, you know, I think that if Donald Trump didn't feel threatened by DeSantis, he wouldn't go through the tirades that he's been, including personal attacks. So I think Trump is really the one on the defensive. And it's more a matter of how DeSantis handles his newfound, I'm going to call it semi-front runner status in the Republican Party.
Scott, you've been keeping up to date on this, and in a recent Truth Social post, Trump he came out swinging with a bunch of figures in an attempt to almost eviscerate Ron DeSantis' Florida record. So, first, I guess, how accurate do you think those claims are? And second, I'm wondering, what's the political downside for lambasting the most popular Republican governor in America?
Well, I haven't fact checked the data on Florida's like education statistics and whatever else Trump went on about, but it was basically all these things are bad about Florida under DeSantis. And, I think Tim responded at the start of his response where he talked about how like the people of New York feel a certain way. And it's sort of how the people of the place feel about the place tells you what their leaders are. So the people of Florida, by their vote, have said, we're happy about the job this guy's doing. Yeah. And so that tells us all, I think, all we need to know about, he's clearly not a perfect person in governance, Ron DeSantis, that is. But I think that a lot of governors around the state wish they could be in his position with respect to popularity among their own voters. And the second question you asked was, what does that mean for Donald Trump to denigrate DeSantis and in the minds of the primary voters? Well, I can tell you that it seems like it would diminish Trump among Republican primary voters who get fed a regular diet from their chosen news media sources of positive stories about Ron DeSantis, generally because DeSantis is a skilled political operator. He's doing all the right things in terms of attacking the woke where they live with the trans children pushing and all that kind of stuff. That's all seems to be playing very well to Republican primary voters or likely Republican primary voters. So I can't imagine that that's going to accrue much to Trump's benefit with those folks.
It reminds me of was it Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment? Thou shalt not attack fellow Republicans.
Yes.
Don't speak ill of fellow
Don't speak ill of another Republican, right? Well, that's not something that Donald Trump ever signed on to. He doesn't adhere to the Republican 11 commandments. And yeah, I think Scott's right. I don't see rank and file Republicans responding positively to Donald Trump going scorched earth on Ron DeSantis. I don't think that Trump has quite the standing to do it anymore. You can look at it this way, and Ron DeSantis pointed this out. The first comment that he really made directly about Trump, although it wasn't direct, but it was obvious, he said, essentially, I'm a winner and he's a loser. He's saying I won by 20 points in Florida, whereas Trump lost in 2018. So he's trying to sort of flip the narrative to say Trump is the loser, I'm the winner. And that is something that drives Trump insane because to him, his whole image is about winning. And I'll say this, if he doesn't win the presidency this time, he's not going to go down as a winner in political circles. He's going to go down as someone who somehow won an impossible victory once, but could not take that and harness it into continued political power.
Okay, and I guess we're going to wrap this up with a quick look at what the polls are saying. Now, as you pointed out earlier, Tim, the national polls, they give Trump a heady lead, 10 to 20 points, I think you mentioned, over DeSantis. How much do you think this will change once DeSantis officially declares?
Well, I think it's going to tighten up quite a bit because right now DeSantis is just a prospective candidate. And even though we all know he's going to run, and he basically told Piers Morgan in this interview where he went after Trump that he's going to be in, but he isn't in yet. So the average kind of voter is not in a position really to evaluate him. They also don't care particularly about what he did in Florida, except to the extent that he takes that same agenda and brings it national. But I think most of this depends on what I call the war on wokeness. And Ron DeSantis has declared himself general of the army in that war. And we'll see whether he can, overtake the 45th president of the United States in the hearts and minds of Republican voters who still, for the most part, think very fondly of Trump's record, if not his personality.
Gentlemen, thanks ever so much for joining me.
Always a
Mark.
pleasure.
And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'd like to thank our special guests, Tim Donner and Scott D. Cosenza, and of course, you, the listeners at home, for taking the time to tune in. I'll leave you with a final thought courtesy of G.K. Chesterton, who wrote, quote, "Fairy tales do not tell children the dragon exists. Fairy tales tell children the dragons can be killed," end quote. Now, he's talking about narratives. He's talking about the power inherent with some stories. And that's an important point to consider, for the facts may be the facts, but the way we hear and understand them may be something else entirely. Folks like Alvin Bragg may think they are the dragon slayer, but that's not necessarily how this looks to the outside world. He's in serious danger of being cast as the villain, and of course, showing those good knights how he can be vanquished. Just something to think about. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5. Produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone. Hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner. Joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors. Deconstructing leftist narratives. Debating the hot topics. And remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe
You only
space.
did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5.